Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Ethiopia's ruling Prosperity Party takes roughly 90% of seats in elections that hand Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed another half-decade in power. He's focused on ramping up the economy. The country remains deeply divided, with some regions having not taken part in the vote at all. Also, in Tunisia, rising inflation hit over 5% last month, causing price hikes in food and essentials across the board. Increases are in part because of supply chain issues, but overall Tunisians are feeling the pressure on every front, in part all made worse by parallel rises in unemployment rates. And small but mighty Cape Verde keeps on coming after its 2-2 draw against two-time World Cup champions Uruguay. The Blue Sharks plan to keep swimming. The fans are ecstatic. But first, in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's ruling Prosperity Party won a landslide majority in the country's legislative elections, taking 438 of the 501 contested seats. Abiy's been in power since 2018, and the outcome hands him another 5-year term. He's hoping to brand Ethiopia as an African economic success story, but divisions remain deep. Some areas didn't take part in the election at all, including Tigray, where the threat of renewed war is still very real. Our correspondent, Tom Canetti, tells us more.
It's the result that everyone was expecting. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and the Prosperity Party have won almost 90% of seats in Parliament, giving the Prime Minister another 5 years in power. Abiy Ahmed campaigned on the promise of economic reforms and the development of major cities like the capital Addis Ababa, but about 70% of Ethiopia is currently affected by armed conflict, and the entire Tigray region was excluded from the vote. Without the permission of the federal government, the TPLF organised a sort of internal vote during the same week as the general elections, and there are fears of a renewed conflict between the TPLF and the government forces, the same parties who fought against each other between 2020 and 2022 in a war that killed more than 600,000 people. Last week, the US imposed visa restrictions against leaders of the TPLF, but I spoke to the spokesperson of the TPLF who accused the federal government of imposing a blockade of resources against the region and arming groups who are situated west of the Tigray region. On the federal government side, it accuses the TPLF of becoming allies with Eritrea against Addis Ababa.
Tom Canetti there for us in Addis Ababa. For more on this, I'm joined now by Jervin Naidu, who is a political analyst. Jervin, thanks so much for making the time to help us break all of this down. Now, back when Abiy first came into power, 2018, it was a huge deal. There was a lot of external hope at the time that he'd usher in stability. He was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. That was before that pretty brutal war. Now, here he is hoping to attract investment with a very positive assessment of where Ethiopia is today economically. But does that match the view of where the country stands at the moment as seen from the outside?
Yeah, I think you've covered that quite well, Georgia. I think the main thing is Ethiopia struggles from dealing with reputational risk from the outskirts of the Tigray war. Since the end of the war, he's been working really hard at improving Ethiopia's reputation, but the Tigray conflict, ongoing tensions there, and with Eritrea as well as in Amara and Oromia, are hurting those reputations. Also, there's been attempts to liberalize the Ethiopian economy, but a lot of investors have been scared away by the reputational risks of allegations that the government's involved in several human rights abuses. There's been media restrictions leading up to the election. So while he is projecting that Ethiopia is this grand economic destination, which it is, there are great lucrative opportunities, it's really still suffering from reputational risk, and he's really trying his best, and he's going to continue this going forward.
And even when it comes to regional stability, Ethiopia's relationships with some of its neighbours remain pretty rocky, don't they?
Yes, you mentioned a few of them, Georgia, but just broadly speaking, you have the tensions with Eritrea. So historically, there are these tensions between Eritrea and Ethiopia over which country belongs to who, when they were separated between the two. There are those tensions. There's also The Eritreans are allegedly aligning now with the TPLF. During the Tigray War, the Eritreans fought on the side of the TPLF. And then, as you mentioned, Abiy won his peace prize for brokering a peace deal with Eritrea, but those tensions have now escalated. You then have tensions with Somalia because Ethiopia signed a deal with Somaliland for direct access to the sea. Now, gaining access to the Red Sea has been a main part of Ethiopia's or Abiy's main goals. So he's been looking at trying to deal with that. Then also you have issues with Egypt around the GERD. So the GERD is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, and the problem is that Ethiopia are worried about, well, Egypt are worried about how it impacts on the Nile, and there's been reports recently that with Sudan that Ethiopia are supporting the rebels. It was an attack on Khartoum, which the de facto government, the SAF in Sudan, believe the Ethiopians were part of. So there are lots of tensions that elevate and make the security situation on top of their own reputational risk quite challenging.
Back home, though, even though there were parts of the country that were excluded from the election at the beginning of June, over 90% from the Prosperity Party is still a pretty solid showing. So who are Abiy's staunchest base within the country? And what about him do they connect most with?
Yeah, I think that's a good point to highlight, Roger, that despite the challenges, he is a popular leader. The Prosperity Party is popular. You know, he formed the PP in 2019 as a replacement for the EPRD. The whole idea was to move away from a sort of very federalist, ethnic-based politics into one. Unfortunately, it hasn't exactly worked out because the TPLF did not want to join the PP. But he has a sort of Masonic kind of Messiah-esque presence in Ethiopia. You know, Ethiopians see him as this leader, particularly with the inauguration of the GERD, which is a massive infrastructure project. The brokering peace with Eritrea. So he's popular, and particularly also he's from Oromia. He's popular there. He's popular in parts in most of others, and the strong base comes, all the investments are going through others. So he's also well liked internationally. He speaks the international lingos and, international relations at the AU and UN. He has that very statesman-like. So he's got both the domestic support and he's able to translate this into international support. So he's a well-liked person, and it shows also within his party securing 90% of the vote, albeit challenges.
Thanks very much, Devin Naidu, there, helping us break down some of the complexities of Ethiopia's political landscape, with the Prosperity Party having just been re-elected with a majority in legislative elections. Now, Kenya's health minister has been found in contempt of court for failing to stop the building of an Ebola quarantine facility for Americans. Aden Duale's defended the project against backlash that pointed to the country's already overstretched healthcare system that critics say is not up to also managing foreign patients potentially infected with the Ebola virus that's sparked a crisis in DR Congo. Now, the plans sparked protests in Kenya itself, and the court had directed the government to suspend construction of the facility pending hearings. Duale is due in High Court on Tuesday for sentencing. Now, in Tunisia, inflation topped 5% last month, causing price hikes in food and essentials across the board. The increases are in part because of supply chain issues, but the pressure on Tunisians is made all the worse by a parallel rise in unemployment rates, especially in marginalised regions far from the capital and the coast. Our team sent us this report.
In this market in Tunis, Mufida makes her living by trying to sell the leftover goods other vendors couldn't offload. She barely earns enough to get by.
I'm always worried about earning enough to recoup the cost of the goods. It's really not easy. I earn my living day by day.
Over April and May, the cost of tomatoes climbed to between 4 to 5 dinars, double December's price. Shoppers are having to cut back.
People don't buy by the kilo anymore. They buy individual items. That shows they can't afford it.
The inflation is down to a combination of things. Some of it's because of bad harvests, but also middlemen are hiking up prices.
Distributors at the wholesale market have a margin. Some sell strawberries for 3 dinars, other for 5. I only trade with 2 or 3 of them, so I have to take the price they request. I make up a bit by going to farmers directly for certain fruits, but the transportation costs me.
The government's attempts to regulate prices have had limited success, and higher prices are even more painful for those out of jobs. Unemployment figures are high and not going down. This dilapidated industrial zone is abandoned after courts ordered the closure of the paper recycling plant until it can be updated. 60 families have been affected by job losses.
The factory has been closed for 9 months. We can't keep up the maintenance, electricity, and water have been cut off, and the roof was almost destroyed after heavy rains. I tried to reach officials, courts, ministers, and even the president's office. I don't understand why they left us in such a state. Why did they leave us closed when this is a region where people need jobs?
Many communities like this feel unseen and unsupported amidst the country's economic crises. The main national labor union is pushing the government to restart talks with them on the social and economic pressures felt by so many Tunisians.
Well, World Cup watch now, and fans of the Pharaohs are still buzzing after Egypt's first World Cup win on Sunday night. Legend Mohamed Salah scored the clincher that sent Egypt on to defeat New Zealand 3-1. Egypt moved to the top of the standings in Group G with the win, but is not yet assured of a spot in the knockout round. They'll be playing a deciding game against Iran on Friday in Seattle, needing at least a draw to advance. Fans, though, are still feeling positive.
It just shows that anything could happen. I think everyone had Egypt losing. They had like one of the big European teams so supposed to dominate us, and then we came out. And I think teams and countries that have a lot of passion really shine through in this World Cup. You see a lot of ties and upsets.
I'm very happy for the fans, for the supporters, for all Egyptian and Arabic people. Thanks God we win the match, and we hope for the third match too. We have to win to be able to go to the next part of the tournament.
And more positive vibes. Another stunning success story for the continent is Cape Verde. Everything is equal on the pitch, and the tiny island nation that stunned tournament favourite Spain last week did it again against Uruguay, a 2-time World Cup champion, on Sunday, coming from behind for a 2-2 draw. It now has 2 points in Group H, along with Uruguay, facing Saudi Arabia in its final group match. Cape Verde is the third smallest nation, according to population, to play in the tournament, but it is leaving an outsized footprint, and fans want to see it keep on stepping.
This is a draw that feels like a victory. Anyone who thought we came to this World Cup just for a stroll is very mistaken. Cape Verde came here to enjoy every game, every moment, to see if we can advance to the next stage.
Cape Verde played a beautiful game. The next game will be even better.
You cannot imagine the trouble that we had voicing that with the appropriate amount of enthusiasm. We just accepted that we couldn't do it. So we hope that you enjoyed some of the excitement there from some of the fans from the continent following the World Cup. That is all we have time for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.